Brigham Sunday is the founder of RePoem, a company that celebrates classical literature and poetry. RePoem offers a range of products and services, including classic journal edition books, poetry memorization cards, and a YouTube channel featuring poetry and literature-related videos. And Brigham joins us now. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Toby. Thank you.
So, what gave you the idea to start RePoem?
Ever since high school, I have been fascinated by poetry and literature, and I have always been looking for ways in how to further enrich that knowledge and deeper study with classical literature, with poetry. I had come across some books years ago that fell more in the religious realm of things. They were journal editions of like scriptures and things like that. And I thought, why is no one doing this with other types of books? And when I say journal editions, it's wider margins. There's room and space to make notes and things like that. And so I love to annotate. I love to mark up books. I love to have a tactile book in front of me rather than listening to it or reading it on my Kindle. And so I decided, hey, let's take this idea of journal editions, wide margins, lots of space to write, and let's bring that to the classics.
Yeah.
And so I looked online and nobody else was doing it, surprisingly. And so I got on there and started to make my own books and design my own covers. And that's kind of how this whole thing started. And now I have, 8 titles and 2 more on the way and many more to come.
So why do you believe that classical literature and poetry are still relevant today?
That's a fantastic question. I think that a classical education is something. I'm a former teacher. I taught for 8 years. I taught in high school, taught in middle school. I taught a variety of subjects from English to Spanish, as well as film and so forth. And I saw something missing with kids, something missing in children. That was a deeper understanding of history, of classics, of literature. And I also saw the power of those things on education. As especially in the U.S., we don't get those topics. You're not exposed to the classics until 9th grade, 10th grade. You get a little bit of Romeo and Juliet, and that's about it. And then you don't see any other classics. You're never exposed to Charles Dickens, to Jane Austen, to, any of these other classic artists and authors until college. And by the time you get to college, it's too hard. You've never learned how to read those kind of things. And I think there's real deep value in understanding them and learning the history and the depth and knowledge that comes with classic literature.
That's true, isn't it? Because when I was at school, I don't think we ever read a book by someone I'd heard of before. We never did Shakespeare or Dickens. But I suppose despite that, we still know about the classic stories, don't we? I mean, everybody knows A Christmas Carol, for example.
Absolutely. And there's a reason why those classics have lived on so long, is because the teachings, the lessons in them, the values. And so there's some great stuff in there that needs to be captured and learned again. And so, I'm just trying to revitalize that and jumpstart this kind of movement again.
So why do you think a journal edition book will enhance the experience?
That's a good question. I have learned, I like to teach, and I do this on my YouTube channel. I like to teach others how to read, how to study. Reading is more than just opening a book and just skimming through the pages. It's a deeper process. It's like I said before, it's tactile. It's having a pen and paper. It's annotating. It's making notes. It's thinking about things, contemplating and a deeper study. And so I learned from a young age, when I have a book, to mark it up and to put my thoughts and feelings into it. And we just don't have that mindset, especially with libraries. You get books from libraries, you can't write in them. You can't add your thoughts. And so a journal edition is something where you can really dive in. You can write definitions, you can write your feelings, you can write your thoughts. It's nothing new. This is it's not some new technology. It's just something that I think kids and children aren't learning how to properly do. They don't learn how to properly read. We all read left to right and right to left, depending on where you are. But you put a pen and paper in hand and things change. You get a deeper level of understanding.
I suppose it's like there's a difference between hearing and listening. So you can be reading without actually thinking about what you're reading.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I tell you what, you take, a fantastic book like Pride and Prejudice, and you read that with a pen in hand and your
Yeah.
own personal thoughts, and it's going to open new paths that you have never felt or seen before. So there's power in it.
Who would you say a journal edition is for? Because maybe some people just want to read the book and enjoy it without having that space to write down their thoughts and definitions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always room for escapism reading where you're just read to read. But those who want a deeper kind of study insight into the world, I think the journal editions are for them. Also for students, and you're assigned, in as a freshman in college, I was assigned Frankenstein, which I absolutely loved and adored. I would have loved to have a journal edition to mark up, to add my notes, to add the professor's notes and things like that, rather than just the Penguin edition hard copy that I had. And so I think students, that's why I chose books that are typically studied in school for the initial ones that I started with. So any students out there looking for a place to put their notes and lecture notes and things like that, it's a fantastic option for that.
And do you hope that it will kind of inspire a new generation to appreciate classic literature and poetry?
Absolutely. That's the direction I'm going, to push a deeper understanding. I want my children to know, who some of these authors are, what they wrote and the contributions they made to art. And that's the direction I'm heading with that, and bringing back classical literature, classical education, which is what we're missing in education. So
yeah. And do you think it should be put more prominently into education?
Oh, for sure. When I taught English, I taught AP English for quite a while to seniors in high school, and Frankenstein and Shakespeare and all sorts of different things were in my curriculum, and there's power in that. There's power in exposing kids to that type of literature, especially through a modern lens. So as we look through and read through that literature through our modern lens, how our society is, that's why it's lived on, instead of studying, Hunger Games or Harry Potter, that's nothing against those things, but there's much more powerful lessons to be taught.
Sometimes people have gone back and looked at classic books through a modern lens and made a new edition of it, correcting things that today would be seen as offensive. What do you think about that? Because some argue that we should keep things exactly how they are, and others say that we have to change them.
Yeah, no, I love the modern interpretations. I think they're fun. I think it also garners the interest of the students and things like that. For example, Pride and Prejudice was redone as what was it? It was like Pride and Prejudice Zombies. There's been all sorts of spin-offs of like the classics, and especially in film, they'll redo. You watch Seize the Man, which is anyway, there's different Shakespearean movies that have been redone. But I think it's fantastic, and that's how kids get interested in that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, there was Romeo and Juliet, wasn't there? That was a big one.
No, Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, I love that show. Yeah, it's a good one.
And your Etsy page as well offers poetry memorization cards. So how did those cards help readers deepen their understanding of poems?
Yeah, so I absolutely love poetry. I've been memorizing poetry for decades. They say that idle mind is the devil's workshop. And so I like to keep things in my head all the time that I'm thinking about, contemplating, and poetry has been that powerful thing for me. Again, back to classical education, we live in a society now where we don't memorize. We don't need to memorize. We have a supercomputer in our pocket. We can ask Dr. Google at any time. So poetry is a powerful way to think about deeper things, to contemplate, and to also filter through our own eyes. And so on Etsy, I sell poetry memorization cards, just simple little printouts where you can memorize poetry on the go, in your car. And there's power in poetry. There's power in literature, and it's changed my life. And so I'm trying to get that out there to help share and change the lives of others and fill your mind with powerful poems.
Yeah. And unless you're an English student with an exam coming up, What's the point in memorizing a poem other than to show off?
That's a good question. I rarely recite my poems. They're for me. Studying and memorizing poetry helps me to understand myself as I ponder these deeper meanings. You can, as you memorize, you start to internalize, you start to repeat, you start to retain, you start to remember, and you start to see things differently. For example, this morning I was studying Emily Dickinson's poem Hope, where she compares hope to a small bird and the power of this little bird and how it inspires her. And it just then I start thinking about in my own life, the things I hope for and long for. It's just deeper thought. You know, the average person never dips deeper than the superficial thoughts that, you know, run through their head of what they're going to do and how they're going to act throughout the day. And so poetry helps to get you to that deeper level where you can contemplate life, its meanings, and how it's affecting you. So
yeah, and I think maybe you include this in part of your work, but when we often look at poems, we find all sorts of metaphors and symbolism and all these stuff. How much of that do you think is intended by the poet, and how much is maybe accidental and we discover?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think a lot. I don't think the poet intended a lot of what I get out of the poems. But because the poems are written with such rich literary methods, you know, metaphors, analogies, and similes, it allows us to interpret and to run that through our own filter. And so I think that's the power of that higher language, which we never hit in just everyday life. And so, you know, how often are you speaking in metaphors or analyzing metaphors or similes or, you know, anecdotes and things like that? And so it forces us to dig deeper.
Well, what are your personal favorite works of classical literature and poetry?
My all-time favorite is actually Frankenstein. I've read Frankenstein probably 18 times. I read it yearly. I study it. I learn something different every single time I read it. And it's just, it speaks to the morality of man, the philosophy, and just, I love it. So I love Frankenstein. Poetry, you know, I really enjoy Edgar Allan Poe. I love memorizing his poetry just because of the rhyme and meter, and then some of his lesser known poems which have a deeper meaning to them. So yeah, I always enjoy studying Poe.
And you mentioned that you read Frankenstein yearly. Is that like a scheduled thing? Like every year on the 6th of July, you'll sit down and read it? Or does it just happen kind of naturally?
It happens naturally. I'm going through it for the second time with the journal edition, and that's always a great experience to do that. But this past year, I dove a little bit deeper into Mary Shelley's history and watched the new one of the latest films about Mary Shelley, and so gave me a little more context. But yeah, it just happens naturally. I kind of crave it every year just because it's one of those. It's like Shakespeare. Hamlet's another one I study it every year. Macbeth is another one every year I hit on. There's just a few of my favorites that constantly come up.
Well, what are you working on at the moment? Are there any books on the way coming out and other products?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have The Wind in the Willows, which is a children's book that was written many years ago. Coming out. I have Alice in Wonderland. I also have Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which is more a philosophy-based book by Marcus Aurelius. And so those are coming out. Also, I've partnered with a company called Bionic Reading out of Switzerland, and Bionic Reading is a tool, an app that highlights or bolds the certain parts of words. And so as you read through the text, it's easier. Your brain can capture the text quicker and faster because of, you know, a part of the word is bolded and then the second half is not. And so your brain only sees the first half of the word. And so anyway, there's a whole science behind it. So I am working on the first classic edition Bionic Reading book of Frankenstein, which will be released soon. And then I'll do that for all my classics as well. So you'll not only have the journal editions, but you'll have the Bionic Reading editions, which has been proven to help you retain information much quicker and easier than standard reading.
Brilliant. Well, where are we able to find RePoem and all the services and books that you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. we sell everything on Amazon at RePoem. It's RePoem, RePoem. You can also find us on YouTube. I have a series of poems and poetry that is there to listen to and study, as well as some other instructional videos, and also at RePoem on Etsy to find some of our products and different things as well.
Brilliant. Well, many thanks for talking to us today. It's been great having you here.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a good one.